Hi, this is your host, Nicole Serrato. Welcome to the Power of Ambition podcast, episode number 8. This is a disclaimer that this episode contains sensitive content that some people may find disturbing, with graphic explanations of suicide attempts and child abuse. In honor of Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, I will be discussing with you my mental health journey. Unfortunately, during this recording, there were some technical issues, and the audio was not recorded correctly. In an effort to share transparently, I've decided to not re-record the episode and fight my need to be a perfectionist. Life isn't perfect, but that's what makes it beautiful. So without further ado, here we go. Hi everyone, it's your host Nicole Serrato, and welcome to the next episode of The Power of Ambition. Today I don't have a guest, but I will be touching on a very important topic. Before I start talking about that, I just want to thank everyone for your love and support, for liking and subscribing. Again, we're a brand new podcast. The concept is the power of ambition, essentially talking about being ambitious in life. I believe that's where self-development and growth happens, when you are ambitious and you pursue something that you want, whether that's in work, love, life, friendships. I think being ambitious doesn't have to just mean pursuing success of monetary means. It means striving to be the best person that you could possibly be, maybe the best friend, the best daughter, the best husband, the best wife, whatever it is that, maybe just living a happy life is also ambitious, in my opinion. So thank you for everyone who has liked, subscribed, or commented on any of the episodes. This is episode number 9. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, you can find them on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or if you want to see the beautiful faces of me and my guest, you can check us out on YouTube. I definitely got that line from La Platica. If you don't watch that podcast, they're super awesome. They drop every Monday. On another note, I wanted to talk about something that was really close to my heart. I wasn't planning on releasing an episode number 9 just being me, but there's something really heavy on my heart that I want to talk about, and that I've touched on in other episodes, but I don't think I've gone into a full explanation. So today I want to share with you my journey in regards to mental health and therapy, and what that's been like for me, and what I've learned, what that journey has been like. It's not something, like I've said in a previous episode, that I've talked about often, but I believe that the subject itself deserves a full episode, because I think the more that we share our struggles and we're vulnerable with what we've been through, the more that we can connect with each other and potentially help someone else grow if someone's going through a similar circumstance, or if you know someone who's going through a similar circumstance and you want to try to understand where they're coming from. Maybe you've never dealt with mental health issues, maybe you've never dealt with depression, but you know someone who does. So I think you're either someone who's dealt with it, or you have a loved one who's dealing with it. And either side of the coin, I think it's important to share, because if you've never dealt with it, knowing, what that person is going through, I think it's a very helpful information to have when you're dealing with someone who battles depression or suicidal thoughts or mental health or traumas or triggers. So bear with me. I'm going to do my best not to cry during this episode. As a kid, I was a huge crier, quite embarrassing, but when I interned with the Academy of Motion Pictures a few years ago, they decided to spotlight me, and we were like, we want to interview your dad. Great, yeah, definitely. So they were interviewing my father, and they asked my dad, what do you remember about Amanda, aka that's my first name. My full name is Amanda Nicole Serrato. And he's like, what they say, what do you remember most about Nicole? And he said, I remember she cried a lot. And I was like, oh, Dad, I don't think they're asking. Okay. Anyways, they essentially know, if I've always been a filmmaker or a storyteller. he didn't understand the assignment, but it's fine. It was really embarrassing because I forgot how much I used to cry as a kid, and I used to get in trouble a lot for crying as a kid. So much to where I learned how to, what's the word? I learned how to repress those emotions. And for a number of years, I just stopped crying and stopped feeling. And then I think when I was 19, it started up again. I had this whole crying spree. So I go in and out. But for the most part, like in this stage of my life, I haven't been a big crier until I joined acting class, and that kind of triggered some things. But anyways, if you're kind of sensitive to the whole crying situation, just I guess mute me when I cry. If I cry, because I don't, anyways, let's move on. So mental health is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about my journey, when it started for me. Now, mind you, I'm not a licensed psychologist. I'm only repeating things that I've learned in my own journey, in my therapy. I may or may not get some facts right, so feel free to fact check me, which I'll probably fact check myself too. So with that, I'm going to start off by just giving a little bit of a warning. I am going to get graphic with some of the details that I'm going to go over here today. So if you're a little bit sensitive to those things, I would keep that in mind. Or if you're listening to this around children, I would keep that in mind as well, because I am going to go dive deep, and I'm not going to hold back any details in regards to my journey, because I don't think that would necessarily help anybody. And I'm doing my best to not be a perfectionist and be vulnerable. Thank you, Brené Brown. Okay, so I'll dive into it now. The first time that I not realized I was dealing with depression, but an issue came up is when I was 9 years old. So just so you have a little bit of context and some backstory, I was born and raised in West Covina, and my father was born and raised in Los Angeles. My mother was born and raised in San Diego. They met in Hollywood one evening and fell in love and had 3 kids. I was born the middle child. I was born in West Covina, and we lived in LA for, I don't necessarily know the timeline. We lived in LA just for a little bit, and we moved down to San Diego with my mother and my father. And there was I think it was just me and my brother when we lived in San Diego. And I remember San Diego just being a very happy time. It was my mom and my dad, and we used to go to church, and we lived in Chula Vista. Then there was this really big fire. So, they don't necessarily know how the fire started, but what happened was my brother and I were playing in our room, and my mother was cooking for my father. He was downstairs, doing some mechanics on a car. So she had left downstairs to take him a plate of food. And I don't know if it was something sparked the stove or whatnot, but she walked downstairs to bring in this food, hung out with him for a few minutes. And they started to smell smoke, and they didn't know where it was coming from. So she ran up to check on us, and the entire apartment was on fire. My dad says, it's interesting because a week before that, they had a huge argument where our toys should be, whether our playpen or toys should be in the hallway, this little space in the hallway, or if they should be in the back room where we slept. And my dad won the argument, and we had our toys in the back room. When the fire ensued, it took the living room, it took the kitchen, it took the hallway, and the last room for it to hit was our bedroom where we were left playing. My dad sent my mom to go get the water hose to try to put it out, and apparently there was no water hose in this apartment complex, so she couldn't find it. So she went back in the apartment, trying to cover herself, trying to put out the fire with pots of water, and all the while getting third degree burns. My dad was outside, and he decided to climb the pipe drain to go up the side of the apartment. He got to our window, and he as he described it, he punched through the glass of the window because the window was locked. And he was able to get in our room which was the second story of this apartment building, and our window faced like an alleyway. So we got to our room. It was filled with smoke. There was fire at the door. You know, I only remember bits and part of it because I was 3, but I do remember it being very hot, and I do remember seeing like smoke coming from under the door. But my father said that he got in there, he grabbed us, he went to the window, and, you know, obviously he couldn't jump with his 3-year-old and his 5-year-old, so he started just yelling for help. And some guy heard him from, like, I guess, since it was an alleyway, there was nobody passing by, and the fire department hadn't gotten there yet. And so he started yelling. This guy, like, heard him and ran down the alleyway and told him, like, hey, you know, like, I know you don't know me, I'm a stranger, but promise you, you're going to have to drop your kids one by one and I'll catch them. And so my dad he dropped me first, and the guy caught me, and then my brother. And then my dad jumped to the side where there was like a dumpster. So he jumped to the side and like inside the dumpster. I think he said he like sprained his ankle or something. But that was just kind of the beginning of our life. And, you know, my mother was in the hospital for a month after that with third degree burns. She was burned on her face and her arms and her neck. And she suffered a lot from trying to save us. So shortly after that, we moved back to LA for kind of like a fresh start because my dad had more family and more of a support system here in LA. We moved back here, but my mother kind of struggled being away from her family in San Diego. So eventually my mother had my little sister, and then we moved back to San Diego after they split, my mom and dad split. So being in San Diego, my mother had a string of like unhealthy relationships with abusive men. And unfortunately, I witnessed a lot of this abuse. You know, she was dealing with a string of emotionally and physically abusive boyfriends. And my brother and I were the only ones that moved back with her into San Diego. And so we dealt with some of that. And, you know, again, this might be disturbing for some of you to hear. But some of the things that we dealt with was, and by all means, like my mother, she didn't know this abuse was going on. And when she did find out about it, you know, she immediately left those guys. But one of the things one of her boyfriends used to do is they used to like lock us in the closet when she was out. Like if she ran to the store and he'd stay home to watch us, you know, he'd lock us in the closet so he wouldn't have to deal with me and my brother while she was gone. And so my brother and I, we tried to make the best of that situation, and we actually used to play DuckTales. There was like a lot of coats in the closet and roaches, so we just kind of pretend they were the bad guys and we were trying to get away from them. We'd like try to make the best of that situation, but we used to get locked in the closet. Sometimes when he had his friends over, they used to like tell us to like sit down and watch TV with them, and then they'd throw shit at us. Just very cruel things. And then another one of her boyfriends tried to molest my brother. Fortunately, you know, that didn't end up happening. My brother was 5. My brother was 6 and I was 4. Something like that. I don't know if I have the ages correct. But he did molest me, and my brother tried to stop him, but unfortunately he succeeded in whatever sick thing he was trying to do. I have no recollection of it. I only found out because I found the hospital papers when I was older, and I was like, wait, what does this mean? And that's when I found out what had happened. The doctor did say, because I was so young, that I might block out the memory of it, which thankfully I did. This is an instance where like your mind is constantly trying to protect you, you know, like it's a protective mechanism. So these are just a few of the things that I went through when I was in San Diego after my mom and dad split up, and, you know, she had gone through the 3rd-degree burns and a string of abusive men. So eventually we ended up moving back to Los Angeles with my father and my grandparents. It was right before I was 6. And I don't know the timeline, but I think we were back like maybe less than a year. And my mother had decided that it would be best for her to move back to LA. So her and my father had that conversation. So she was planning to come back, and she was supposed to arrive, I think, in 2 weeks after that phone call where she called and said she was going to move back home. And unfortunately, she didn't make it. She had a Greyhound bus ticket. She never showed up to the bus, and they found her a few weeks later. She had been murdered. They found her under the Interstate 5 freeway, naked, covered with like a blood-stained sheet, is what the article said. I still remember being 6 years old and the phone ringing and thinking, that phone call is different than most phone calls we get. And I don't know if it was intuition, but that was the phone call. I remember seeing my father's face and him getting the news and knowing that my life was going to change, but didn't really know what the phone call was about yet. And my father for a long time told us like she had died in an accident. He didn't tell us that she was murdered. And so we thought it was just an accident. So after that, my father, he became a single father of 3 kids. And it was very devastating because they were talking about getting back together and becoming a family again. So it was a very, very challenging time. Thankfully, I was here to crying. Thankfully, we had a lot of family. My dad's side of the family was just so close together. My Uncle Rudy, my Aunt Suzanne, my Nina, my godparents, my grandparents, they were just there as much as possible and helped us through it a lot. I became very close with my grandfather after that. I was like his princesa. And he used to tell me stories about when he lived in Chihuahua, in Juarez, and when he moved to El Paso, and when he was on a traveling baseball team. And so after my mother passed, my grandfather really filled that void, and my grandmother as well. My father was focused on working. He was working a lot, and he was going to school because he was doing his best to provide for his 3 kids. And so my grandparents, lifted a lot of the weight of raising us. And in those 3 years after my mother passed were very crucial. And things were, they were going well. I remember when I was 9, my grandfather, who had essentially become my best friend. And I remember this night so vividly because my grandmother always made sure we were in bed on time. And we went to bed like we typically would, 8:30 or something. And my grandfather that night, he had never done this before, but he came to my bed and he said, "Hey, mija, get up, come outside and watch the stars with me." I was like, "Grandpa, I'm going to get in trouble with Grandma. I can't. She already sent us to bed." He's like, "No se preocupes. Just come watch the stars with me. Come on, andale. You won't get in trouble. I promise." And so I was like, okay. And so I snuck out of bed and I walked with my grandpa out and we sat on the porch and we were watching the stars together. We were naming different stars. And I do remember maybe 6 months before, I might be wrong on this, but I think 6 months before his last brother died, and he was the youngest of 9. And there was a switch in my grandfather that I noticed. He had felt really lonely. He just exhibited behavior that was a little bit different. And so that night, when I was 9 years old, we were out there at the porch watching the stars and naming them. I remember seeing one star that I thought was an airplane. I was like, "Look, I found a star." And he's like, "That's an airplane." I thought it was just a shooting star, but no. And I remember him telling me "Oh, I'm so sad. I don't have anybody left here in the world. All my siblings are gone." And I remember "Grandpa, you have us, And he's like, "Yeah." And I just remember him being very sad. And he was like, "All of our ancestors," it's very Lion King-y. All of our ancestors are up in the stars. And I was like, "Yeah." And I fell asleep there with him. And then a few hours later, my brother shook me, waking me up in a panic, "Get up, get up, get up now. Something happened to Grandpa." And I was like, man, stop playing with me. Like, I'm sleepy. I'm gonna go back to bed. And he's like, no, like, you need to get up now. Like, something's going on. And I was like, okay. And so I like turned to look outside of my room, and there was paramedics walking by my room with my grandfather in a stretcher. And I remember my life was just like, my heart was crushed. This man who I've kind of held on to for like emotional support, and who had become like my best friend, like, I didn't know what was happening. Like, they're walking by with him on a stretcher, and I remember running out of my bed and running after the paramedics, and he was gone, and he died that night. And that's when my depression became, started, because my dad was a single father working, and, typically he wasn't home very often. And my grandmother was at this point 77 years old. My grandpa died at 80. So it was a very challenging time, because her health started to decline rapidly after he passed. And so she needed my help a lot. And so I started waking up with her at 6 a.m. to cook breakfast for all of us, and handmade tortillas. And I learned how to make salsa de la molcajete, and, chorizo con huevos y papas. And so she woke me up very early to help her with that. And then her eyesight started going. So she needed someone who could like do basic math and help her with the bills. And in the Latino community, like, the oldest girl is like the oldest, right? So it's like she wasn't going to ask my brother to help her cook, or my brother to ask him to help her write the bills. So she turned to me for that. So between 9 and 10, still trying to internalize that my mom's gone, and now my grandpa's gone. And now I've been placed with the duties of the household: cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, folding, and at the same time, going to school and trying to learn. And I remember feeling so unseen, so unworthy, so not wanted, just because if I wasn't helping, I don't know, I just felt like a sense of like worthlessness, in a sense, because it was just kind of like I was going through the motions of helping, but I was like I hadn't processed my mother being gone, my grandfather being gone, and my grandmother being sick, and, having to help be the caregiver for my siblings and my grandmother. And so it was very overwhelming and stressful at 9 years old. And I just remember feeling so much pain and so much sadness that I just wanted it to end. Like, I was so, and then not even including the traumas I went through in San Diego. And so I remember having that thought, like, oh, if I could just make this be over. Now, mind you, I don't know where that thought came from. Like, I don't know what triggered, the action, but I remember when I waited till like nobody was home, everyone was kind of outside the house, and I was there by myself. I mean, not like by myself, they were like in the front yard. And that was my first attempt at suicide, is when I was 9. Maybe 6 months or so after my grandfather's death, and after, getting all these responsibilities placed onto me. And, no fault of my grandmother. I mean, she herself was 77, taking care of a 6-year-old, not helping my father take care of a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, and an 11-year-old, which is, to me, it's like at 77, that's a lot of pressure. And so I had attempted to hang myself, and it almost happened. I, looped the rope around my neck, and I remember tying it to the top of like some cabinet and letting myself go off the ledge. I remember for a slight moment, like losing air in my throat. And in that moment of not being able to breathe, something, like, it was like a voice inside my head was like, no, like, stop this. Like, this is not the path for you. And so I was close enough to like the closet door where I just kept like kind of swung myself. Sorry, I'm laughing, but I kind of swung myself to like grab the side of the door, which it took like 3 tries of swinging myself over and grabbing the door and then like stopping it from happening and like untying the rope from my neck. And then what happened is I just like collapsed onto the floor and just like sobbed because at the fact that I had just tried to take my own life. And I remember at the time I was really close to this girl named Grace who was a neighbor of mine. And so I called her and told her what I had just attempted, and she was devastated by it, of course. And I just explained to her, you know, what I did, and she was just kind of stood on the phone with me, which was really helpful. And after that, like I did an attempt again until I was 14. So I was still silently dealing with the depression. And what I learned later on in life, like when I was in therapy in my early 20s, is that I actually had PTSD as a kid, post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of people misconstrue that PTSD is just for our veterans that come back from war. But PTSD can happen to anybody who goes through a traumatic, stressful situation, which is what I had gone through. And at the time, my teachers thought I had like a learning disability because I couldn't read or write at grade level. I had a hard time concentrating in class. Like I was way behind educationally than my peers. And the teachers chalked it up to be some sort of learning disorder. And what I learned in later years with my therapist is that I had PTSD. I was dealing with post-traumatic stress. I was probably having flashbacks to certain traumatic experiences and having all these emotional feelings and not knowing how to navigate them or deal with them. And so, unfortunately, I tried to commit suicide 2 times after that, once when I was 14. And what triggered that was the same kind of feeling of like pain and worthlessness and kind of like the world would be better without me here. Like I'm only adding like negatively to the world, and I'm also feeling all this pain, and I just want it to stop, and I don't know how to make it stop, or I don't know how to feel it and move on from it. Like it was so painful. And so I remember trying again at 14. And at 14 I had taken taken a bunch of pills. My dad was like super strict, and I think I had gotten in trouble for like talking to a boy on the phone or something, and I got punished for 3 months for that. Yes, I was talking to a boy on the phone about schoolwork, and I wasn't allowed to have guy friends at the time, so I got punished for talking to him. And I was already, I think it was just the pressure of life at 14. My grandmother was progressively getting worse in regards to her health, and which meant that the duties and tasks that I had to perform besides school had increased. And it was just, I was depressed. I was a depressed child, and I was dealing with all these things I couldn't understand. And so I attempted again at 14, taking like all kinds of pills in the household. And I think I took every single bottle I could find and just took half the bottle because I wanted to make sure I didn't like leave my grandmother without her medication. And the reason that didn't end up happening is because my brother, for some reason, he never came to check on me, but he came to check on me that night, and he had found my suicide note on the side of my bed. And he made me get up and forced me into the bathroom and forced me to throw up everything. Which, who knows if that would have gone through or not, but he definitely saved my life. And because he knew I was dealing with that, we became a little closer. And like he would tell me, like, if you ever feel that again, whew, all right, here we go. We're good. He was like, if you ever feel that way again or need someone to talk to, he's like, talk to me. And so he was someone that really helped me in that during that time, because I knew I had someone to go to. He also didn't tell my dad what happened or anybody else. He kept that secret. But which in retrospect, like maybe he should have told someone. But at the time, I was really grateful that at least I had him to talk to, and he didn't shame me for it. I mean, he shamed me like a little bit. Like, you don't want your story to be, this person, that. And yeah, and so then the last time I attempted suicide, because even though those had failed, I didn't turn to alcohol. I didn't turn to drugs. A lot of people who deal with these type of emotional issues tend to turn to those things. What I did was I started working. So shortly after that attempted suicide, I decided I need to get a job. And so I started working at Subway, and working for me was like the distraction. It was my alcohol, it was workaholism. So it's like, if I could stay busy, then I don't have to think about the pain, that I don't have to but I never numbed it in a substance way. I numbed it with staying busy. And so I started working at 14 and a half at Subway. And that's how I kind of just numbed it. But I was really around this time, because I was going through so much depression, so much I was timid, I was shy, and I was dealing with a lot of social anxiety because of those things. And so I was very, very, very quiet in high school, and very, very quiet even around my family. I was extremely quiet. And so it wasn't until I graduated from high school, and my dad and I, like I said, he was extremely strict with me growing up, super uber strict. I wasn't allowed to have any boyfriends until I moved out of the house, and I didn't. And I moved out of the house 2 weeks after high school graduation, still just kind of suppressing the depression and any feelings of that sort. Another way I dealt with it, which I didn't mention, is since I worked at Subway, it was workaholism, staying busy, and it was eating. So this is around the time I started to gain a crazy amount of weight. I was extremely athletic in high school. I ran track, I ran cross country, again, staying busy, workaholism, and I played soccer, and I worked at Subway, and I managed the household, and I went to school, obviously. So this time for me, high school for me, was just about survival. I didn't think I would make it this far. And I say that in the most positive way. Life was just so hard. I just didn't think I was going to make it past my early 20s. It was just about surviving day by day, and keeping busy. And so one of the things I turned to was food. Subway's cookies were pretty bomb, and the bread was really good too. And so I gained a lot of weight during that time. So fast forward to 18, I moved out of my dad's house 2 weeks after high school graduation. He had a big fight, and we just were butting heads, and the environment at the time in my household was not the best. So I decided to move out, and he apologized, and I just decided that I needed to be on my own. I moved out, and a year later, my grandmother, who wasn't happy about me moving out, was diagnosed with dementia. And for me, it was really devastating, because I don't think I ever thought about her dying, because my mother died, my grandpa died. I just didn't think that she'd go so soon, because she was in such amazing health, mentally, physically. And so she got diagnosed with dementia, and that just kind of tore my heart apart, because it's I'm losing another person, before I even turned 21. And I had just reconnected with my mother's family, my great grandmother on my mother's side, and she had passed. And then right after she passed is when my grandmother, who raised me, who's like my mother, was diagnosed with dementia. And I remember I quit my job. And because my uncle was, they were going to put her in a home because there was no one that could really help take care of her. So I quit my job and said, no, I had made a promise to her that I would never allow her to get put in a home. And I started helping take care of her, changing diapers, showering her. I mean, at this point, I had been showering her since I was like 12 because, she was in her 80s at that point already and needed assistance. So I had been showering her since I was 12 years old. So that part was nothing new, but it was having to, she didn't have a lot of control over her faculties. So, adult diapers and helping feed her. She wasn't mentally there anymore. The dementia, when she got diagnosed, was extremely rapid. She went from having like a coherent and sound, super sharp conversation to like seeing things in the corner of like the room that weren't there. And sometimes violent outburst. So fortunately, she didn't suffer too long. She ended up passing, I think it was right after Thanksgiving 2006. It was like a week after Thanksgiving, something like that. So after she passed away, it's when things got really hard for me emotionally. Again, I had already been suppressing depression and suppressing suicidal thoughts and suppressing all of that through work. And so I remember the night she died, I had left to go home because I had an apartment in Pasadena. I'd left to go home to get some rest. And my dad's like, take the night off. And so I got home and I remember falling asleep and he called me around 3 a.m. like she passed away. And I regretted not staying and going home to rest. And so I drove back to my dad's house and I got on the bed and laid down next to her. She had already passed and I just kind of fell asleep there with her, holding her. And I woke up the next morning at 7 a.m. and was like, okay, I'm going to take a shower and I'm going to go to work. And my whole family was like, where are you going? What do you mean you're going to work? I was like, yep, bye, I got to go to work. And they're like, your grandma just died. The woman who just I was like, yes, I am. I'm quite aware of that. I got to go to work. And I remember that was the way I dealt with it. The way I dealt with it was by not dealing with it. I didn't want to deal with the fact that she had died. I did not want to accept it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't even want to go to her funeral. I only went because my friends went and they were like, where are you? This is your grandmother's funeral. We're here. You're not. Where are you? And I was working because I was trying to avoid at all cost reality. I couldn't accept reality. So I went to her funeral, and I want to say for the whole year after she died, I had never physically attempted suicide like the first 2 times, but I was having suicidal thoughts like almost on a daily basis. And it had gotten really, really bad where I would just, I would drive and think about crashing into the side of the wall of a freeway or something like, maybe that would be a good way to go out. And, luckily around this time, I met my therapist, Georgiana Rodiger. I met her at church. She was a pastor and she was the ordained minister. And she was also a clinical psychologist. And I started seeing Georgie at 19 years old, around like maybe 19, 20 years old. And she just completely changed my life. And the things that I learned from her and how to get out of the depression, not have suicidal thoughts anymore, how to recognize patterns, how to realize the things that happened to me or the mistakes I had made were not me. They were things that happened to me. They were mistakes I made, but they didn't define who I was as a person. That who am I as a person is separate from the things I went through. And that was just the beginning of a beautiful self-development, self-realization, and journey. and I really want to get into the nitty gritty of it and what exactly I learned through therapy. But I wanted to kind of catch you up on, what I battled with. And, we're going to go on a quick break. And when I come back, I'm going to talk to you about what I learned from Georgie and what I learned from the books that I read on mental health and psychology and where I'm at in my journey now. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break because I think I need to drink some water or maybe some salud. If you don't know salud, I'll put the link in the bio. Salud it's a hydration drink. Trust me, you want to get it. I think I just shouted out La Platica and La Salud in this episode. Maybe because it's like I just finished watching this week's episode. I'll be back. 5 minutes. See you soon. And we're back. So if you've gotten this far, you've definitely braved the storm that I went through. Sorry. No, I shouldn't apologize. I'm not apologizing. But you definitely braved the storm because that was, I think I needed that 5-minute break because that was a heavy load. That was a lot. I'm gonna stop saying, I'm just kidding, I can't sing. I mean, a little, maybe. So I want to talk about my journey after therapy. I talked to you about what caused my depression, what caused my suicidal attempts, and I want to talk about what I learned from Georgie. Again, I'm not a clinical psychologist and I'm not licensed, so I just, FYI, or what is that, disclosure? Full disclosure? But I want to learn, the number one thing that I learned from Georgie is you are not your parents and you have your own journey and you are not your mistakes. I made mistakes in my early 20s, which I was like super ashamed of, like the attempted suicide and other behavior. And I really self-identified the fact that maybe my journey, my mistakes and the traumas, I self-identified as they were one. And she helped me realize, no, you're not your mistakes. You are a separate entity. You are a person who made those mistakes, but the mistakes are not you. And one of the most important things, I forgot my headphones. One of the most important things that I learned from Georgie, which I want to say was monumental in my growth and change as a person, is the concept of repetition compulsion. Now, if you know a little bit about psychology, you've probably heard of repetition compulsion. What that basically means is I'm going to just break down the title, repetition compulsion. You compulsively tend to repeat patterns that you saw as a child or as, I think it's from 0 to 9 or 0 to 12. I don't know the exact ages, but essentially repetition compulsion says that your brain, is powerful. And what it does is it records everything that you've gone through, throughout your childhood. And that at a certain age, and I don't know if it's the same for everyone or if it varies, it stops the recording, presses rewind, and then repeats. And what that means is, if your parents were alcoholics or if they smoked or if they, were prone to certain behaviors, certain patterns, unconsciously and compulsively, we tend to repeat those patterns that we saw. So she taught me how to kind of gauge when I was repeating a pattern. And one of the ways she did that is she's try to recognize patterns in your life that you saw in your father's life. So it took a lot of self-reflection, not just in my life, but also to look at my father's or my grandmother's or grandfather's or mother's life and see okay, what patterns or what things did they do in a certain way? And am I repeating some of those patterns? And so one of the things is like when I was younger, my dad tended to drink a lot, or like a lot of my family members tend to drink a lot, had tended to drink a lot. I don't know if that, anyways, grammatical error, I think. They used to drink a lot. So I noticed when I had started dating, like around 19, I tended to gravitate towards guys who drank or towards guys who smoked. And, there were certain behaviors that I noticed that I was attracted to, but I realized through pattern recognition and trying to come from it from like a self-reflective point of view, that I was attracted towards a certain person who wasn't necessarily good for me, or could have been, was toxic, but because I was like repeating a pattern from something maybe I saw growing up. And so that's what I really learned from Georgie. It was like how to recognize patterns in not just my parents' life, but let's say your community, because you are impacted by your community and what you experienced growing up. So like what patterns are occurring in my community, or what patterns did occur in my community that I'm unconsciously repeating? Because there was a couple of books in psychology, and I'll put all the books in the notes, but the book that Georgie wrote is called, oh my goodness. Okay, first it's by Georgiana Rodiger. It's still available and I'm on Amazon, and I think it's called Christian Psychology, because she kind of married those two together. You don't have to be Christian to read the book. It's very, very highly, it's very psychology heavy. And there's also psycho-cybernetics that I read. But essentially, in one of these books, they talk about repetition compulsion, that like, I don't know if it's like 80 or 90% of our actions are actually unconscious. And when you say like, okay, well, if that is unconscious, where is that unconscious action or compulsiveness to do that action come from? Well, that's where it comes from. It comes from us repeating patterns of what we saw as a kid. So that was the first thing that really changed my life, is like looking at my parents, looking at my community, and trying to recognize patterns in my own life and change them. Try to be more, consciously make decisions, and continually asking myself, am I making this decision based on my unconscious, or am I consciously making this decision? And that really changed my life, because if you think about it, all of our lives are an accumulation of the decisions that we make on a daily, hourly, minute by minute basis. That's it. The experience you're living today is an accumulation of the decisions that you've made for the past 20 years. But not like 20 years in general, but like the daily decisions, the hourly decisions, or like what make up your life. And so if you try to hone in on where those decisions are coming from, what thought are going behind those decisions, it will help you, if you are dealing with depression, or if you are dealing with suicide. And one of the things that I had decided to do was not base my worthiness on other people, which I'm still working on. I think a lot of people work on this, but I did base my worthiness on what I could do for other people. And I realized for myself that where that came from was from an early age. I found worthiness on being able to help my grandmother cook dinner. I found love in I felt love and acceptance when I gave her a bath. I felt love and acceptance and worthiness when I helped her do the laundry, fold the laundry, put the laundry away. So the times that I felt loved and worthy of loved is when I was performing acts of service for my family. Now that can be looked at as a very positive thing, because some people's love language are acts of service. That makes sense. But what it translated to for me in adulthood was, if I'm not providing a service, or if I'm not doing something for someone, I'm not worthy of their love. And that can lead to a few different things. that could lead to you being taken advantage of, which happened to me a lot in my early 20s because I was extremely naive and very gullible. So I could be very much convinced to do things for people who didn't actually care about me. And I was convinced to do things for people who didn't actually care about me. And one of my best friends, Valencia Carrillo, she's on the third episode of The Power of Ambition. I remember after meeting her, I don't know if I was at a party or if she invited me to a party. I don't remember the circumstance, but I remember her, maybe I was trying to help with something at the party. Like, it's hard for me to sit still at a party and be, like, I have to, like, help clean up or put some, empty cups in a trash can, or just, I always have to be doing something. And it's that inherent compulsive repetition of, if I'm not doing for you, I am not worthy of your love. I am not worthy of being here if I'm not adding value in some sort of way. Like I said, the negative aspect is that people used to take advantage of that. And with Valencia, I remember her saying, I was like, hey, do I need to bring anything or do anything? Or she's like, listen, just be. You being here is enough. And I remember the first time she told me that, I stopped and I was like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean that me being is enough? She's like, yeah, you don't have to do anything. You just be present. Just be. Like, you just being here is the gift. You don't need to bring anything. You don't need to do anything. Sit down. Just be in the moment. Just bring you. And that was really hard for me. And she had to tell me several times. But it was such a blessing because I didn't realize that I didn't know how to be. And I still have to regulate that and stop myself, because even when I start to develop new friendships, my first initial compulsive reaction is to do something for them. Like promote a brand or service that they're promoting, or shout them out, or I can't show up without like giving or doing. Like, if I show up to a party, I will stay and help you clean up. Whether you're a new friend or old friend, or I know you, I might not even know you, and you invite me to your party, and I'm going to walk around trying to clean up cups because it's compulsive in me. It's just a repetition compulsive of like how I know how to, like, in the past, I've gained my worthiness and love from that. So I think you got the point on that part. But that's just an example. So it's like, growing up, like, what have your patterns been? Like, what has made you feel, worthy of love? And for me, it was, I couldn't just be. I had to give. I had to perform. I had to, provide a service. And so now I realize that my value doesn't come in, and my worthiness of love doesn't come from doing things for other people. My worthiness of love just comes from just being me and just being present. And that was a really, really huge thing that I learned from Georgie, and that was reconfirmed by my best friend, Valencia. So those are a few things I learned from her. I learned a lot more, and this podcast would go on for like hours if I went through everything I learned from her. I do want to do like a chapter by chapter from her book, and I will do that. I actually lent that book to a friend, so I need to pick it up before I do that. But I want to do a chapter by chapter on her book, because I think it's so crucial. She passed away in 2018. Georgie, I love you. I miss you. And rest in peace. And I remember thinking, when Georgie passes away, like, how am I supposed to remember everything she taught me? It's like, I wish you wrote a book. She's like, I did. 1984, before you were born. What? Such a blessing. So I'm definitely going to go through a chapter by chapter in that book. Next, I want to talk to you about what I learned I put this monitor in front of me, and so now I can see myself, and like, I occasionally look over like, It looks fine. Lighting looks good. Andy, shout out to Andy, the gaffer, who lent me these lights. It looks amazing. Don't you like these blue lights? Thank you, Andy. And Skylar for helping set up. So anyways, my point is next I want to talk about what I learned from expressing my traumas through art. And specifically, I want to talk about the short film 1993. Some of you who have been following me for a long time know about the film. For those of you that don't, 1993 is a short film that I wrote, produced, and acted in, directed by Jasmine Marshers. I, thankfully, with so many supporters, we were able to raise $7,000 and produce this film. This film is an adaptation of a poem I wrote called 1993. Now, if you've already been listening to this podcast, you know that my mother passed, and she had passed in 93. So this poem is about how I dealt with the resentment and the anger towards the person who took my mother. Unfortunately, the murder was never solved. We don't know who committed the murder. And so this poem talks about that rage and that anger and just the pain that comes with knowing that someone that you love was taken so violently. And so after producing this, or while producing this, like with the encouragement of the director, Jasmine, she wanted me to act in it as well, which I was extremely hesitant to do because I had worked through a lot of the things I had written about, via therapy. And I was really nervous to go back because I was afraid like I'd lose my progress. But the reverse happened, which was very interesting. While I was preparing for the role, one of the exercises, required the character who I was playing, who I created for the short film. One of the exercises was to be interviewed by the acting coach. And so the acting coach would interview the person, the character I was creating, and then they would open up those questions to the audience, and the audience was the other students in the acting class. And one of the students, and I don't remember who it was, asked me, my character I was playing in 1993, if I take away the fact that your mother had been murdered, if I take that away from you, who are you? Or have you been so meshed with this trauma that you don't have an identity outside of that trauma? Has your identity been mingled with this thing that didn't even happen to you, happened to your mother? Who are you without this? And it was an amazing exercise from an actor's standpoint, from a character standpoint. It really helped me hone in on the character and play the character I created for 1993, which had gone through something similar that I did. But I asked myself that question. Have I been living so much in the past of my mother passing, of my grandfather passing, of all the suicidals and depression? Have I been living so much in the past that my identity has been meshed with the trauma and I don't know who I am without this? And I realized I didn't. I was 26, 27 years old, not living for me. And I often didn't let myself even have a good time. I didn't go out. I wasn't enjoying life. I wasn't thinking about life and how do I want my life to unfold? Who am I? And I realized that through art, through writing 1993, through creating the film, I realized it was so therapeutic for me to talk about this because I was I need to separate this. Who am I without my mother being murdered? I'm not just, my mom was murdered. And it bothered me for a long time because when I would give speeches, that was the first line I'd start with. And I was no, I'm Amanda Nicole Serrato. I am me. And that is something, unfortunately, that happened to her, that happens to involve my life because she was my mother. But I don't have to let my past traumas or my story defined who I am today. And ever since then, I've worked on creating my own self-identity and just kind of disengaging, acknowledging what has happened to me in the past, but also separating my identity from it. Sometimes you can be so attached to the traumas that have occurred in your life that you start to identify with them as that's who you are. But it's not. You are not your traumas. You are not your mistakes. You are not the things that happen to you. Those things happen to you. They do not define who you are. They build your character and make you who you are, but they don't define you. And that's huge, huge difference that I learned and that has helped me build self-love and self-confidence and self-worthiness. That my worthiness does not come, my worthiness for love does not come from doing things from people. My worthiness from love doesn't come from, oh, look what I overcame. My worthiness of love is just being me. And that is enough, just being me. And I want to say that if it wasn't for the expression of art, I don't know if I would have come to that realization. Maybe it would have taken 5-6 years in therapy to realize that. But writing 1993 as a poem and developing into a film and acting in it, it really helped change me. So I would encourage you, if you have some outlet for art, whether it's writing or film or singing or whatever artistic thing that it's a healing process. And I highly encourage people who are dealing with depression or suicidal thoughts, expressing those things through art. It can really be cathartic and very important for your progress. Last thing I want to talk about is trauma triggers and social anxiety. And I'm not, I think I need like a whole episode just to talk about this, but we'll just hold off on that for now. So although I have, been through therapy, years of therapy, thankfully I haven't been suicidal since 19. I haven't dealt with depression, but I have had trauma triggers. And what that looks like for me is anxiety attacks. I used to get really bad anxiety attacks, not necessarily social anxiety. It was just like anxiety or past traumas from my body that would come up. And one of the things, and I mentioned this to someone at my gym, but one of the triggers for me is, I didn't talk about this earlier on, when I was in the gym, I want to say it was 3 months ago when this first happened. There was this boxer. I go to a boxing gym. There was this boxer who had like this one of those weight bags, and he was like, wah, throwing it like against the wall. No, I did this one. Wah. He was like throwing it against the wall, and he was like, wah, like a really big like grunt, and then the ball would hit the wall like, I don't know if that's gonna hurt your ears. Maybe we might mute that out. But the ball would hit the wall really hard, and it almost sounded like a huge bang or knock. And when I was a kid, I lived with my mother in San Diego, as I told you earlier, one of her boyfriends who she'd broken up with because he was not good, used to stalk us. Like, he was so upset that my mother broke up with him, so he used to stalk us. And one thing that he used to do, and not often enough for her to realize it was him, he would come and knock on the door like he was the police, like really like loud knocks. And when she would open the door, he would like sucker punch her and run. And my memory of this was like seeing her open the door and like just falling back. And like just like, she'd get like the huge bruise on her eye from it. And the guy would just run. And so I have a trauma trigger with loud banging noises. So in the gym, I remember I was working out, and then I hear this loud banging of the ball and the grunting, and it just took me back. It took me back to when that guy used to knock on the door and sucker punch my mom. And it was almost like not mental, it was physical. And I remember like I started hyperventilating, and I had to remove myself from the gym. This is the first time it happened. I literally walked outside of the gym where I could like not be near the sound of the ball hitting the wall. And I was like, okay, breathe. And I just remember like just flooding with tears. Like I wasn't crying, but I was just like, my body remembered that trauma and I was flooding with tears. And I was like, okay, it's just a ball hitting the wall. It's just a ball hitting the wall. You're not in San Diego. This is not real. Like this is just a trauma trigger. And went back inside, continued to hear the ball slam, couldn't deal with it. I had to go to the bathroom and hide and cry and try to like get over the fact. And then I went out again. I'm like, I can't do this. I had to wait till he finished that workout so I could finish my workout. And I didn't really know, like, how am I going to deal with this? Like, so it happened second time, same situation. I could not deal with it. The third time that it happened, he was a little closer to me. And I thought, okay, instead of running to the bathroom, instead of going outside to where I'm not hearing this anymore, let me look around and reassociate that sound with the current situation. So I remember looking at him slam the ball and then looking around the gym and looking at everybody and listen to the sound and look at him while he did it. And then I internalized and tried to associate that new memory with the current situation. And then after he finished his workout, I went and I did ball slams myself. I like got the ball and I was slamming it against the wall and I was listening to the sound and reassociating that sound with a different memory. And fortunately, I can get through ball slams now. It's not a trigger anymore. And this is not something I learned from a therapist. This is not something I learned from a book. This is just a way that I figured out works for me on how to deal with trauma triggers, is trying to reassociate the sound or the memory or anything that triggers with my current situation. Because I realized that my body or unconscious is being triggered by a memory or by a trauma that technically doesn't exist anymore. So by reassociating, that sound or the circumstance or whatnot with a new memory or a new reality, which is the current reality, the now, I've been able to get over certain trauma triggers in that sense. So that's just one example of the many trauma triggers that I've had. But it's been reassociation. I might want to Google if this is like a thing that psychologists use. I got really vulnerable in sharing, my mental health journey with you, what I've learned along the way. I am definitely going to link a couple of books down below. And oh my God, that light died. Okay. I didn't charge it. Anyways, this is definitely meaning we're going to wrap this episode. Thank you so much for joining The Power of Ambition. This is your host, Nicole Serrato. I just want to encourage you that if you are having any issues with mental health, any suicidal thoughts, please seek help. Talk to a friend, talk to an expert. There's a lot of people that are going through this. And I think if we just talk about it and share these experiences with each other, we can all get through this together. And I hope you have a lovely day. And I'll see you next time on I'll see you next time on the podcast vlog of The Power Ambition. You can find us again on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.